start on time rather than Indian Standard Time, which is, as we know in India, instantly stretchable time. So we follow something else. We are going to be discussing a very important topic this morning, which is the whole issue of justice and religion and the concomitant complementary issues. I would love to have spoken on this agenda, but I shall desist from any verbal diarrhea except some introductory remarks. We have a saying in India, which is a popular saying: the law in this life, justice in the afterlife. We have a difficulty in terms of actually coming to terms with the complete climate of both heightened notions of sovereign immunity and, more importantly, extremely deeply entrenched notions of official immunity not available in common law jurisdiction anywhere else in the world. And before I invite the speakers, I just want to make brief comments. I'm sure the issue will be tackled from many dimensions. And the fact is that much of the religious strife has not at all been addressed in the realm adequately. And not to go back to any historical antecedents, but even starting from 1979, Jamshedpur, the major sectarian conflict, which we call communal riots, the 1984 anti-Sikh riots, the 1989 Bhagalpur, 1991-92 Mumbai major riots, the 2002 riots in Gujarat. The fact is, there is an element which is absent when sectarian conflict takes place, except as we saw it in the Balkans, which is a highly sophisticated state-endorsed bigotry. It's not only between sectarian groups, but the issue is of state-induced bigotry. And this is where, from some of the international participants, I would love to hear on their experiences post the Ratko Mladic case, where there was at least an accounting for this massacre of 8,000 Muslims in that area. And the whole development, especially from the Spanish speaker, on the extraterritorial jurisdiction, where now the Spanish courts are dealing with a very interesting case, which is of a great interest to South Asia, which is the case brought by the Tibetans and their Spanish friends against the Chinese leadership in a Spanish court. The importance is that the termination of judicial inquiry bodies and commissions of inquiry by the state, instead of letting them go forward and uncovering the truth, there is an attempt to bury the truth, to protect the guilty. And this is complete negation of any concepts of justice. And this is what I fear, that we are not addressing what should be the basic tenets of a proper, fair judicial system. And I think this is something that should agitate the minds of all of us. I'll stop here. We have some wonderful speakers. I don't know, Mr. Punyani has not come, but I guess yeah. Acha. Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So I will perhaps invite Professor Winter first to make her presentation. I look forward to hearing of it, because I'm a great admirer of the Spanish extraterritorial jurisdiction. It has had its problems, but it's something that I think other jurisdictions could do well to learn from and profit by the pitfalls that Judge Gasson made and others made, but it's still something available to you, which, unlike Germany and Belgium, who have withdrawn from it massively. Thank you very much. Professor Winter, you have the floor. You can speak for about 15 to 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for the audience for being so early here. Thank you for to the organizers, really. I really appreciate having me here and having me invited to this very interesting conference. And I will try to stick to the time the president of this panel has given me, although we know that we professors like speaking too much, and especially when we have some patient audience and some microphone in front of us. But apart of this, I will try just to give some highlights in this very broad topic, which is religion and justice. My background is coming from a specialization in justice systems and dealing with reforms in improving the rule of law and human rights protections by changing or introducing amendments in the justice system. So I probably will frustrate the idea of the president while making the presentation that I would be dealing with the extraterritorial jurisdiction laws in Spain, which have been very progressive, but I'm not dealing this morning. If we can discuss them later during the discussion open for the rest of the public, for the rest of the audience, if this is an interesting topic, which has been really progressive, especially in extraterritorial criminal justice. But today I want to stick to the topic that has brought me here, which is a huge, broad topic. And I have been not given any guidelines how to really limit and restrict this presentation. And talking about religion and justice, I mean, these are the core concepts, and so broad, I really have to highlight certain ideas, because otherwise we would be here staying not for hours but for years. So religion and justice have obviously, and this is something very obvious I should not have to explain, and are closely linked together. Most religions seek to comply with the justice principles, or the other way around. Legal orders, in order to comply with the justice principles, have been based or have been following the values that had previously been developed by most religions. So justice is linked to this religious previous values experiences. And it would be unrealistic to think that judges don't use and will not be using their previous religious values when adjudicating their cases. The idea is deciding in how far this is positive or in how far this is negative. But that would lead us to a very sterile discussion, because if it's possible or negative, it's absolutely not necessary to come to a conclusion, because the reality is that those values will be flowing into their decisions. So once that we realize that these concepts, these realities are absolutely intertwined, religion and justice, the idea is now to focus on how the justice system should be designed and should be established in order to protect more efficiently religious freedom, human rights, and promote the rule of law. And when we depart from the assumption that rule of law is protected only when there is a fair, predictable legal system that responds to the problems and the needs of a society in a fair and an equality way, non-discriminating others and showing effectiveness, we really have to stick to those concepts: fairness, non-discrimination. Rule of law, through the application and implementation of the rule of law, it will, these fair systems will inculcate the idea in the population that believing that respect for law will be enforced in an equal, in a fair manner. How to guarantee this? How to guarantee that those who are in charge of making compliance with the rule of law, so abiding by the law and making that the whole system abides by the law, really adjudicate in a fair, equally, or abiding by the equality principle and non-discrimination in their judicial decisions. If we depart from the assumption, and for me this is a premise, we could discuss, and this is the specialized forum on how to design the public policies in order to promote religious freedom. I depart from the assumption, in order not to enter into very deep discussions, that the better protection for religious freedom is the model of inclusive pluralism. So for me, inclusive pluralism is something that is to be sought. It's the ideal of tolerant pluralism that has to be found also in that body, the judiciary, that has to provide for the rule of law, for the respect of the rule of law. And what are the real two elements that I find are crucial in the judicial power really providing for equality, fairness, and subject only to the law? First, the obvious premise is that the judiciary is independent, because the independence will be the prerequisite for impartiality, and impartiality is only a derivation of the principle of equality. And the second premise, the second core element is the legitimacy of the judicial system, of the justice system in itself. So I will address only these two issues: how to ensure independence, and because this will be the premise to provide for equality and then for protection of human rights and promote this model of inclusive pluralism, and second, how to promote the legitimacy of the justice system. Well, when we talk about independence, the definition of independence is very clear and very easy for everyone: not being dependent. And what makes a person, a judge, being dependent? If he has some certain ties or certain lack of safeguards that impedes him or her to decide in a certain case, not only abiding by the law or not only subject to the law. So the idea of the judiciary not being dependent from the other branches of power is a crucial idea to ensure the checks and balances in a democratic society. So not being dependent from executive and obviously subject to the law, but does not make them dependent of the legislative. That is a very clear idea, and I do not need to elaborate more on this. Not being dependent from other bodies that might be business bodies, economic lobbies, or religious bodies. So how to make them not dependent, and in what way could a judge who has religious beliefs become dependent from them? Is this a problem? Is this a risk for the independence of the judiciary? And the first idea to ensure that the safeguards for independence are present and complied with is ensuring an adequate system of selection of justice, so that the appointment of the judges does not depend on political issues or political parties, or it's not politicized in itself. And second, irremovability and the security of the judge, physical, personal security of a judge, that taking a decision will not entail consequences for his life or her family well-being. And fair criteria for promotion. While all these safeguards for granting independence, that the person when facing the judicial office is really free from any kind of external, internal pressure to decide only following the law, needs also clear criteria of promotion, but a self-governing body. The establishment of a self-governing body is obviously the usual way to avoid interference by the executive, and that would undermine the safeguard of the independence. Coming now to the point, clarified these premises, coming now to the point on religion. And if the judiciary is dependent in some way from the executive, and the executive holds certain majority or religious views, that might be a way for interfering in the non-discrimination impartiality that a judge has to abide with. But following a very commonly assumed assumption, it should be discussed also. If a religious person, those religious persons are more dependent than non-religious persons from institutions that can interfere externally in their adjudication, the idea is questioning us if religious judges might not become or ensure in the same way as other non-religious judges the independency of their office. And second, if a religious judge lacks, just for their own religious beliefs, in some way certain appears or may appear certain lack of impartiality. There is the extended affirmation that religion or religious people are seen as more rigid or more closed-minded in their stances regarding to certain issues, which would not allow them to approach absolutely in an impartial manner when deciding cases, because they already have a very stable, solid preconception on certain things that might make them biased or prejudiced relating to certain issues. First, we should say, in the vast majority of cases, the religious beliefs are not crucial to decide ordinary cases that come before the judiciary. But it may play a major role when it comes to the so-called complex cases or hard cases where religious values, moral values, really come to the forefront in deciding these border complex cases. What we should clearly state is that there is no evidence, that a more religious judge will not decide according to the facts and evidence presented to a case. There is no evidence, empirical evidence, and through history, that a more religious person is more closed-minded than a non-religious person, or a secularized society will be more open-minded than a religious society, and thus this has application to the single judge. The issue is obviously if the judge is biased or not, and if he or she has already this predetermined approach to certain issues. But this is not necessarily linked to the religious belief. A person can have absolutely a position towards issues which he or she will not change under no circumstances independently from the religious beliefs. So we come to the conclusion that religious beliefs per se are not grounds for lacking impartiality or making a person suspicious of being unable to approach a case in an impartial way. And religion obviously is part of the own philosophical world views of the judge. And obviously it implies certain considerations on the political, social, religious position and in a society. But this is something that is inherent to the judicial office. Is the worldwide philosophical conception of a person that is absolutely necessary and positive to introduce into the adjudicating process. But obviously, when a person, religious or non-religious, has come in certain cases and certain issues to an absolutely unchangeable stance that does not allow him or her to change her mind when adjudicating a case. So this judge will lack impartiality because he's not able to approach the case following the principle of equality, equality towards the parties. That means and requires deciding a case upon the facts, upon the arguments, upon the evidence presented in that very precise case. But again, I insist, this is not linked to religious belief. So we give the answer to the quite often introduced question that religion, facing a religious judge, will determine already the decision because the person is biased. Nothing of that has been shown and empirically demonstrated through history. The second point I wanted to address when talking about religion and justice is the legitimacy of the justice system. Because if in most societies where judges are not elected in a democratic way, the democratic legitimation exists only in certain countries or in the states at the state level, the legitimacy of the judicial power is based upon their own functional legitimacy. This has been explained very clearly in the opinion by the Consultative Council of the Justice in Europe, in their opinion 18 of 2015, where it defines and describes that the judiciary appointed according to the constitution of a law, of a country, 3 minutes, and the laws of the state is already constitutionally legitimized because the appointment has and the selection has been followed in the appointment. But legitimacy cannot, and this is precisely stated by the Council of Judges in Europe, Consultative Council, legitimacy cannot rest only there, in the fairness or in the legality of the appointment procedure. And it has pointed out that the legitimacy of the judiciary relies upon confidence. The confidence on the judicial system and the respect for the judiciaries, for the impartiality and independence of the judiciary will enhance this confidence. So to achieve and maintain the legitimacy of the justice system, each judge has to continuously show that their work is valuable, that they are abiding by the law, that they're not discriminating anyone. And this kind of legitimacy, which has been called functional legitimacy, is earned through the work of every judge in every judgment, in every system, and also by following high ethical standards. And now here, my question is, this legitimacy, how can it be enhanced through religion or in religious societies where there are minorities that might feel not confident in the judiciary because they don't feel that judiciary, those judges, will respect their own beliefs or will be discriminated only by their own beliefs. And this requires, obviously, to have certain pluralism also within the judiciary. And those societies, those minorities that are facing a judiciary which is homogeneously from one religion, they will feel that they are not represented or that their stances will not be taken into account as for the majority religion, and then lack confidence. The lack of confidence makes lacking legitimacy of the whole system. So in order to provide or prevent non-discrimination, there should be certain pluralism within the judiciary. I'm finishing already. But second, it's essential legal and education, but especially education in human rights for the whole members of the judiciary, that they are really built in that they have really a conscience of what is the meaning of human rights and what is the meaning of tolerance, so that they can go beyond their own beliefs and their own religious stance in order to understand the other believers or the other persons beyond that their own religious beliefs. I was trying to explain in how way pluralism judiciary can be introduced and how it should not be done. Because there have been, and I think it's interesting to just recall, a case of the European Court of Human Rights, Šećik versus Bosnia, that deals with the equal representation of different ethnic groups in public positions. And when I mean public positions, is not only, which is the case, dealing directly in representation in parliament and or eligibility for run for the presidency of the country in Bosnia, and also for judges. Bosnian constitution, and I cite this example because it's a very extreme situation where religious conflicts that lie beyond or behind the ethnic conflict have been taken into account in order to provide pluralism in the public offices, in the judiciary as well. And the Constitution of Bosnia says that all constituent people shall be represented in an equivalent way in public offices. So the constituent peoples are defined by Croats, Serbs, and Bosniaks. And every citizen of this country has to affiliate to one of these ethnic groups. And public positions and judges are only selected of those three groups. And the case that came before the European Court of Human Rights was dealing regarding a person, Mr. Šećik, who declared himself not affiliated to one of these three ethnic groups, but being from the Roma population. And the other one, Fini, which is accumulated in the same case, declaring himself being of Jewish origin. So both of them not affiliated to the ethnic group in that certain case, and the analogy can be traced to religious affiliation or religious belief or faith, made them impossible to occupy being eligible for certain posts. Well, is this against the principle of equality? We would say, well, it's a fair way in order to provide pluralism. But it really discriminates those who are not in those three ethnical groups. Is this in conformity with the principle of equality guaranteed in Article 14 of the Convention? And how could such a rule come into a constitution if it's not abiding by is not respecting the principle of equality? And the court decides, and I'm finishing already, the court decides in this case that in that inequalities and discrimination of certain groups might be justified in certain cases. So inequalities to promote certain equality is allowed, or discriminating to promote certain goals is allowed. And it was justified. And the time it was the Bosnian constitution back in 1995 was passed because the justification of introducing this rule was to promote or ensure, restore peace in the country. So the only way to come to a solution in the Dayton process, in the Dayton Agreement, was really giving opportunity to those three ethnic groups to be equally represented. However, after 10 years later, the court considers that that justification does not anymore exist because peace has been restored and the continued discrimination is not anymore justified. So this would be the way not achieving or granting pluralism within the judiciary to represent all religions in the country. So reserving certain percentage of posts to certain ethnic or religious groups. But of course, providing that all kinds of religious people accede to the judicial office might ensure more inclusive pluralism and a more open approach towards protecting minorities. Thank you very much. I excuse myself for taking much more time than allowed. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for reminding us about the checklist that you did about the ingredients that went into an impartial and responsive, pluralistic democracy. Many of us Indians are not so familiar with the European jurisdiction, but we are quite familiar with common law jurisdictions in the Anglo-Saxon sphere. I'm sure you've raised a number of questions. We have one problem in Delhi. So I will now skip to Professor Danish, who is associated with the Department of Islamic Studies of the Jamia Hamdard University in Delhi. The university is a very well-known university, and apart from that, he is also associated with a very good policy think tank, the Institute of Objective Studies, which looks at contemporary issues from a Muslim point of view, but has some very acute observations and useful observations on a number of contemporaneous issues. Professor Danish.
How much time I have?
15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I had prepared myself for a 10-minute presentation, but just I have been told that I have 5 to 7 more minutes. So I will divide my lecture in 3 parts. First, I would try to explain the concept of justice in Islam with reference to Quran and sayings of the Prophet. This is important because the immediate problem, not before the Muslim community and Muslim Ummah globally, but for many other countries, including India, USA, and European countries, is the rise of ISIS as in Iraq, Syria, etc. So Muslim youth, according to intelligence reports, in India also are getting attracted towards ISIS. And I think, among other things, it is very important that they be told that according to Islam, or according to the concept of justice that has been explained in the Holy Quran and sayings of the Prophet, they are not doing the right thing. So this is very important from that point of view, because I have interaction with young people, and I find that the kind of education system we have, we are preparing careerists. They study subjects on the basis of which they get degrees, on the basis of which they can find a job. They are Muslim, they are Hindu, they are Christians, or Jews, or whatever, but normally they don't know about their own religion. They don't practice their religion, especially the modern educated youth. So it is a high time that they should be taught, because they are getting attracted towards some very dangerous organizations. They are a danger for the peace in the world, and they have created havoc in many West Asian countries. So Muslim youth need to be told about the Islamic concept of justice. So this is the one part of my lecture. Then I will relate this concept of justice very briefly to the broader topic of this seminar, that is peace, stability, and sustainable development. And thereafter I will also touch on the problem in West Asia, and again with relation to justice, because sometimes those who are dominant powers, they do things thinking that, well, they can do anything and get away. Here and there some intellectuals are there from India to USA. They criticize their policies, but they are nowhere heard. And the dominant power simply get away. They go unpunished. And later on, through scholarship of some of them who were basically involved in the operation of injustice in those areas, they later on tell that they were wrong, And perhaps they also admit that it was perhaps their mistake that contributed to the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, etc. So we have to touch on that one as well. So now I begin with the concept of justice in Islam. Topic, as you know, is religion and justice. In the Islamic worldview, justice means literally placing things in their proper places. To place things in their proper places, this is the literal meaning of justice in Islam. It means that giving the due to the deserving. Whatever you deserve, that should be given to you. And also, in juristic sense, it means that the guilty should be identified, and those who are doing right, they should also be identified, and accordingly they should be rewarded or punished. This is the concept of justice in Islam. As I said that I am going to address those young Muslims also who are getting attracted towards ISIS, etc. So I am going to quote certain verses of the Holy Quran for your common benefit and for those who are interacting with common young Muslims, in order to impress upon them that whatever they are going to do is wrong. The concept of justice in the Holy Quran and also in the sayings of the Prophet is very important. It has been given, it is rather next to the faith or iman. This is something very important. A saying of the Prophet is that on the day of judgment, 7 people will be under the shadow of God, when there will be no other shadow except the shadow of God. 7 people will be under that shadow of God. One of them will be Imam Adil, the just ruler. This is something very important, and this saying of the Prophet is always quoted in order to highlight the importance of justice in Islamic scheme of things. Another saying of the Prophet is that, O my followers, I have forbidden injustice for myself and I forbid it also for you. That is the believers and common Muslims. So avoid being unjust to one another. This is again very important, that this addresses Muslim that basically everybody has to be just to himself as well as to fellow believers. Our jurist has also extended this meaning that one has not only to be just to oneself and to fellow believers, but they have to be just to the fellow human beings also. And there are several verses in the Holy Quran that I am going to quote, that justice in Islam is not only for Muslims. This is rather universal. This is not only, that has not to be dispensed only among Muslims, but it has to cover entire mankind. So 2 or 3 verses of the Holy Quran I will quote here. God commands justice and fair dealing. This is again very important. God commands justice and fair dealing. This is universal teaching. This is not confined, or this has not been addressed to Muslims only. This has been addressed to the mankind. That if you are God-fearing, then you should be just to yourself, just to fellow citizens, and also just to fellow global citizens. So this is something very important. Another verse is that, O believers, this is again addressed to the Muslims only. The first verse was addressed to the mankind, and the second verse is addressed to the Muslims. This is again very important. The commentators of the Holy Quran have explained that since Muslims are being assigned a very special task by the Prophet or through revelation of God, that's why they have to be addressed. That first you have to apply justice to yourself. Unless you are just, you cannot dispense justice to others. This is something very important. So the verse is that, O believers, be upright for God and be bearers of witness with justice. This is something very important. If you preach something good, then you have to do it with justice. Justice is very important. If there is no justice, whatever you say, that will go just in the air. People will listen and they will just not follow it. So you have to be just. This is the Quranic teaching. In order, the point in the verses that I have explained, that Muslims have to be just individually as well as collectively. This is again very important. One has to be just to himself. Unless I am just to myself, I cannot dispense justice to others. This is something very important. And one thing is very important, that individual actually is the first unit of any group, tribe or family or whatever. And ultimately individuals make nations, local nations or global nations, global community. So 3 minutes only. He told me that 10 minutes I have spoken. Okay. No, he told me. 10 minutes is over. Okay. So well, this is now I will skip this. I had some verses, etc., etc. Okay. So anyway, so now I have come to how this topic, the concept of justice in Islam that I tried to explain, can be related to this broader topic, peace, stability, and sustainable development. You see, if we want to attain peace, we have to be just. Whether we want to attain peace, achieve peace in our small family life, or in our village, in tribe, or at the national and international level. Peace has to be established first, and if there is no justice, there will be no peace. So in order to achieve peace, we have to be just. We have to dispense justice among people. And if we are not doing that one, then we cannot achieve peace. Stability and sustainable development are supposed to be a byproduct of peace. If there will be peace, then there will be stability and there will be development also. If there is no peace, there won't be any stability or development. So this justice is very important. And I think those who designed this program, they perhaps had this idea in their mind that how religion can contribute to achieve peace and the consequent stability and development. So this brings me to some contemporary issues. Our friends in the West, and we interact in seminars. I have been there also in USA, immediately after the fall of the Twin Towers. And in one interaction I asked if attacking Afghanistan was a well thought out policy or it was an expression of outrage. I think many people may not have heard this expression, an expression of outrage. There is a difference between a policy and anger and outrage. I personally feel that the response to the attack on World Trade Towers was an outrage, an expression of outrage rather than a policy. Ultimately, it was the policy, it was CIA that found out Osama bin Laden and killed. Then one has to ask, why for about 10 years Afghanistan was bombed to medieval period? There is nothing there. One has to ask. Here the concept of justice again comes in. And I have not quoted just because of the paucity of time some verses, because there is a verse that the hatred of a nation should not make you blind to justice. Whatever anger, outrage, but one has to be just in every circumstance. This is what the leaders of the world have failed to observe, and because of that there is a lot of trouble in West Asia especially. With regard to the rise of Al-Qaeda, we begin the discourse that there is an Osama bin Laden, he has brought down the World Trade Towers, and we do not go into the factors. We do never rather try. Some books are there, but how many people read books? They go by the statements of Modi, George Bush, and Tony Blair. They make bigger news than the books written by some authors. And the result is that people generally do not know that what were the factors behind the rise of Al-Qaeda and what are the factors behind the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. You see, in our own small way, we wrote some articles in some small journals, etc., that it was marriage of convenience between Osama bin Laden and CIA that gave rise to Al-Qaeda. Unless we know this one, we are not going to attain justice anywhere. Simply, just 1 minute more, sir. This, what is the leadership, world leadership is doing today? They don't have any idea. From Putin to now Donald Trump and European leaders, they only have one solution, that if there arises some conflict here or there or anywhere, let us start bombing from there. West is bombing West Asia since 1921. It is almost 1 century. How they achieved peace there in West Asia? Some people criticize, we Muslims especially criticize the scholars, that the oil wealth which could have changed the fate of the world. There is no denying the fact that oil is behind the world industrialization. But this could have changed the fate of the human civilization had the oil wealth would have been utilized properly, but that could not be utilized. But the fault does not lie only with the Muslim rulers, because the Muslim rulers of oil-rich countries were basically planted by Britain and France there. And more or less it are these families, except Syria and Iraq. There were military coup d'etat there and other leaders came. Otherwise in Saudi Arabia and Gulf states, and these are all oil-rich countries, the families planted by the West are still ruling over this country. And because of that, because of this nexus, there is a lot of trouble. One last sentence or last point I want to make, that the West are those who are dominating the world leadership. They have to make, they have to be clear about one point, that if they believe in conflict management or conflict